What I'm going to be talking about today is legal and social authority of the Shawnee County Health Officer and Emergency Management Director. I want to be very clear with everyone today. This is going to be a 30,000 foot sort of view. It's just information that I think a lot of attorneys out there you never have to deal with, you never really thought about. And as much as you're seeing on the news, it's a little unclear who's really in charge. There's a lot of different reporting out there, a lot of different press conferences, a lot of information coming out. And I think this might be helpful for you to have, if nothing else, to be able to tell family, friends, and potentially clients kind of how this is working and how this all may or may not play out. Everybody seeing the PowerPoint at this point with no problem? Go ahead and just nod your head if you would. Perfect. All right, as an introduction for me, for over a decade, I served as an assistant Shawnee County counselor. As part of that work, I provided legal guidance to the Shawnee County Health Agency and the Shawnee County Health Officer, amongst other county duties that I did. I'll refer to the health officer as the HO or the SCHO as we move through the slides, just for brevity. During that period of time, the bulk of the applied work I did related to addressing active tuberculosis cases in the county and helping the health officer seek orders and enforcement of those orders in regards to tuberculosis. Speaking very generally, went from things such as having folks that were positive and refused to stay in house arrest get ankle bracelets so we could track them and make sure that they recovered from the tuberculosis case they had, to administrative orders getting access to lists of employees so we could track down folks that may or may not have been exposed to particular active cases. You should understand, though, as viewers, that the tuberculosis kind of case provisions and HIV case provisions kind of fall under specific disease statutes in Kansas. They're all within kind of the same area, but there are some specific provisions that relate to each of those, just as a point of reference. And I'm not going to get into those directly, but I give you that kind of that background. One of the interesting questions that kind of pops up in folks' minds, and I've seen kind of bantered back and forth, is we've never seen anything like this before. This has never happened before. Well, this is something new. Well, it has. In 1918, specifically here in Topeka, Kansas, some of these same provisions, the version in place at that time, of course, were applied to the Spanish flu epidemic. You'll note here just one of the notices from the city health officer at that time, and I'll talk about city versus county before we're done today, that was published in the newspaper. Prohibited gatherings of over 20 people. So the 50 people, 20 people, 10 people that you might have seen, that was applied back then in the same manner, shape, and kind of form. I would love to give credit to this specific notice, honestly, on Facebook. I think I've seen it 6 or 7 times now. It is from the Topeka paper at that time. Okay, the intent of the presentation today, at least locally here in Shawnee County and the capital city of Topeka, many of our law students and citizens were becoming very familiar with updates from the Shawnee County Health Officer, Dr. Gianfranco Pizzino, and our County Emergency Management Director, Dusty Nichols. They were doing basically daily updates, and that had kind of become the routine. When I first started putting this information together, I kind of got the feeling that a lot of folks were kind of wondering, who are these folks? And why do they have the authority to be telling us what we should or shouldn't do and issuing these orders and that sort of thing? So that's part of what got me to kind of put some of this together. At the local level, the legal response authority to this novel public health emergency falls with a variety of agencies and officials. And that goes from the governor, Laura Kelly, the Kansas Department of Health and Environment has a role, the Kansas Adjutant General, along with the National Guard, potentially, I don't want to get too far into that either, have a role, on down to the Shawnee County Health Officer and the Emergency Management Director at a local county level, and the city counterparts, if there are any right now in Kansas. I'm not sure if there are. There may be one in Sedgwick County, actually. All right, here's just to kind of cloud your mind a little bit. Here's the issue. The emergency provisions in Kansas and other states are intended to bring together agencies and entities in a seamless disaster response. So all of these kind of intertwine and intersect in how they're actually applied. In this case, we have a disaster emergency declaration, in essence, by the governor that's intersecting with public health emergency declarations by the Shawnee County Health Agency, health officer, and KDHE. And the comparable scenarios like this are happening across the U.S. In other areas. In essence, this is a public health communicable disease emergency. So you have kind of two areas intersecting and the authority intersecting to try and deal with the issues that are arising and honestly changing on a daily basis. One of the points I want to raise, and I don't want to be at all political about this, I just kind of want to lay this out there, is from a social perspective, both groups of elected and appointed officials and their staff and people who work with them have been trying to use the least restrictive means possible to address the threat. Now, we can argue about that all day long, not trying to get into that, but part of what you need to kind of understand is, especially from a health officer perspective, largely what they're trying to do is be the least restrictive so they can get as much compliance as they hopefully can to get the ends to the means that they're trying to apply. And again, people can argue left and right whether it's too much, too little, whatever, but that's in the background beyond the legal authority, what's realistically happening. When I first wrote this, and I haven't changed this last statement, due to fast transmission rates and the facts that many can carry the virus and not really have any symptomology, along with, at that time, a lack of large-scale testing, these officials, the county health officer and the county emergency management director, were admittedly kind of flying blind. There were not a lot of tests that were being done. There were not a lot of tests that were completed. They didn't have a lot of data that you're starting to see now on some of the graphs and charts and projections, both at the state and at the national level now. So that information is now there where you're getting more and more accurate projections. Nobody knows for certain what the final number is, and that there's so many different moving pieces. But when this first came out, they just had to kind of figure out their best shot at what they should or shouldn't do. Again, just to kind of wrap up on that little piece a little bit, the goal is, and why you saw, I think here locally, they called it safer at home instead of a stay at home order. The safer idea was to encourage people to realize, whether you like it or not, you're safer at home than being out in the public and potentially exposing yourself. So all of that is trying to get that compliance, trying to get folks to understand, here's why. It's not that we're being draconian. Here's why we're having you do this. Here's the potential benefits to you in this particular matter. Okay, let's get into some statutes. I know you're all excited about that. K.S.A. 48-924 deals with the governor's authority to declare emergencies. The governor, upon finding that a disaster has occurred or that the occurrence is imminent, shall issue a proclamation declaring a state of disaster emergency. You oftentimes will see this with storms or ice storms or tornadoes or et cetera, et cetera. This is a little bit different in what we're having, but the same basic kind of structure to the issue that's being responded to. No disaster emergency may continue for longer than 15 days unless ratified by a concurrent resolution of the legislature. With the single exception that upon application of the governor to the state finance council on an affirmative majority vote of the majority thereof, the disaster emergency may be extended once for a specified period not to exceed 30 days. Folks were kind of up in arms earlier, it was into the last week might have been, when the state finance council, since the legislature is not actively in session, met. The reality of why they met is this provision. They met to determine whether or not to continue this for 30 days, amongst other things that they were dealing with as well. But this gives you an idea of why that state finance council meeting occurred and what it meant beyond them meeting. I think a lot of folks thought it was going to be more political, ended up being a unanimous decision to support and continue that. Governor's authority. Whoop, sorry there. Understand I'm working from my laptop in my kitchen here at home. Governor's authority continued. You'll note there that the State Finance Council can authorize additional 30-day periods. That may or may not become necessary. I'm sure they're continuing to look at whether or not they need to meet and do that. Interestingly, it can be terminated on the 15th day of the next regular legislative session. I haven't looked much farther into that. Basically, the legislature, if they're able to come back, are going to do sine die and do kind of the final steps of this session. It would not be the 15th day of the legislative session, so we're not sure how that may all play out if the whole legislature would have a desire to get involved in here. And honestly, they may not. They may leave it to the Legislative Finance Committee. You'll note down there under Section D, the proclamation declaring the state of disaster emergency shall activate disaster response and recovery aspects of the disaster emergency plan and of any local and interjurisdictional disaster plans applicable to the political subdivisions affected. Such proclamation shall be authority for the deployment and use of any forces or plans and for use or distribution of any supplies, equipment, materials, facilities, stockpiles, et cetera, et cetera. This is a very, very broad authority. The governor's authority is listed out more specifically in 48.925. Interestingly, folks don't maybe think about it this way, but excuse me, during the disaster emergency, once it's declared, the governor is the commander-in-chief of the organized and unorganized militia and of all other forces available for emergency duty. Our governor is now going to be a commander-in-chief. You'll note in the rest of the paragraph there, and I'm not going to read it off, of course, but the governor is encouraged ahead of time to assign command authority and have prior arrangements. And throughout the emergency plans that are out there, that's done. There are multiple people that are able to step in and make different decisions in that regard. Excuse me. Interestingly, the governor may issue orders and proclamations, and those will have the full force and effect of law during the period of that disaster emergency. I'm going to let you read through this and give you a couple minutes to do so. This lists out the specific other authorities and powers conferred upon the governor. Take a couple moments and kind of read through that. As you read through those provisions, you might note that there are a variety of different points in there. Those of you that might have noticed in the other screen I had up. Okay. Interestingly, you might go down there and see that under paragraph 8, The governor has the right to suspend and limit the sale, dispensing, and transportation of alcoholic beverages, explosives, and combustibles. Needless to say, I was not aware that was something that was in there. The rest of them generally, honestly, make sense if you read through, and that the adjutant general, subject to the direction of the governor, shall administer any orders that the governor issues under this provision. I want to talk a little bit about the emergency management county city programs and plans under K.S.A 48929. You can kind of read through this a little bit. The county and city disaster agencies, determination by governor, plans by, et cetera, et cetera. For practical purposes, each county within the state is asked to have and manage a disaster emergency agency of some sort, an emergency management agency of some sort, and that some cities may be as well. Here in Shawnee County, we have a county emergency management program that the city cooperates as well. You may have seen in the last week or so, our mayor, Michelle de la Isla, has been part of those presentations along with the emergency management director and Dr. Frazino. So they're all kind of working seamlessly together to make decisions for everyone. And the agency basically is also obligated to basically put plans together that can be approved. Again, the authority of the mayor is kind of listed out there in paragraph C. Each county in the agency has to have a current plan, and that current plan needs to be approved. As circumstances change, technology changes, threats change, those are continually updated and shared and practiced and put together and adjusted by those entities so that they can hopefully respond fairly quickly to whatever demand comes up. For those of you that aren't familiar here in Shawnee County, the emergency management program here is actually in what is called the sub-basement of the Shawnee County Courthouse. It is the basement below the basement, and is actually a nuclear fallout shelter. So the whole room is actually set up on springs. Once this is over, if you'd like to tour it, I think Dusty likes to take folks down there and get them to kind of see a little bit of history and where they're working from. Okay, a little bit of health officer authority to touch on that today. K.S.A 65119 works through that, talks a little bit about infectious contagious diseases, have supervision over those particular cases, make sure the cases are properly cared for, and restrictions of communication, quarantine, disinfection are enforced, et cetera, et cetera. They also relay that information to the Secretary of Health and Environment, so the Health and Environment Secretary can keep track of that information, track those trends, track that information, and kind of know where the cases are and what's going on. Quite honestly, you're seeing comparable provisions like this across the U.S. feeding into the numbers and statistics you're seeing on whichever national news channel you follow. That's where those state numbers are kind of moving through the state agencies to the federal agencies, so they're able to track those sorts of things. Interesting, right here in the yellow that's highlighted, there is the authority to prohibit public gatherings for the control of any and all infectious disease. Note also the confidentiality provisions under paragraph B. It is very, very important that the information regarding who, as opposed to numbers or statistical data, be kept confidential. It'd be pretty easy for folks to take pretty extreme measures against or to avoid a family or an individual or a location that had one infected person. So their duty is to keep that confidential, but to share it with the state agency. Sorry. Again, continued here, health officer authority under K.S.A 65129B. You'll note that it's highlighted at the bottom. I'm not going to read it off. But again, authority to basically order an individual or group of individuals to go to and remain in a place of isolation or quarantine until the local health officer or the secretary, i.e. the KDHE secretary, believe that the individuals no longer pose a substantial risk of transmitting that disease. So here you have a second provision that deals with that particular authority. 65-129B continued. It's very interesting that the health officer has very broad authority. C and D deal with if it's a child versus an adult. You're more welcome to read those if you like. Being a child or having a child in one of these situations is very interesting to deal with. I dealt with a couple of those. But importantly, under 2, the health officer may order any sheriff, deputy sheriff, or other law enforcement officer of the state or political subdivision to assist in the execution or enforcement of any order issued under this section. So basically, they have the authority to pull out any law enforcement officer to enforce their orders under this particular authority. Okay, here's the interesting other side of this that I'm sure a few of you out there are thinking about. And I'm not going to pull the statutes out here. I'm happy to send an email to folks later on if you want to look more in depth at this. But basically, there is a due process appeals process to a Shawnee County health officer or a health officer order. There are statutorily described processes. They walk through what steps need to be done, how soon it needs to be done, et cetera, et cetera. But basically understand that they are on an expedited nature with the local court. But as a general rule, these processes only do a few different things. One, first and foremost, they just serve to assure due process and a chance to be heard. Just basic due process. This is not a chance to argue per se, but to make sure the facts and the information are right, they're fair, they're just, the rules were followed, that sort of thing. They do not allow for the order to be immediately lifted. You cannot file an injunction if you have been sent to quarantine and immediately have your quarantine temporarily lifted. You are in quarantine until the court can hear the matter in one way or another. I'm speaking very generally here, but they tend to afford very broad deference to the health officer. The health officer's opinion, the health officer's expertise. As a general rule, the court's going to really look pretty closely at, is this reasonable? If this is reasonable, we're not going to second guess it. Is there something that wasn't followed? Is there an egregious error of some sort? The reality is, if you read into the statutes, they really only address process issues and not medical differences of opinion, with some exceptions. If you have a medical professional who's really out at the fringe or something like that, you could deal with that, but that's not the norm, if you will. Some other resources that are out there, well, it's somewhat outdated at this time, and surprisingly so since it was written in 2013. Written in 2009, and it is outdated because there were a number of amendments in 2013. Is the Bob Parnicott article, Anthrax, Smallpox, and Flu, oh my, the Law of Infectious Disease Control, and that was in the October Journal of the Kansas Bar Association in 2009. Again, a number of these provisions had some updates or some amendments in 2013. So understand as you read that, some of it's changed, but for the most part, it gives a nice history and a nice overview if you want to read more about these issues. Mr. Parnicott, who happens to be a 1991 Washburn Law alumni, also a gentleman I worked with when I was practicing, also refers to that Judith Johnson article that was written in 2009 and gives you a nice little history of the Spanish flu epidemic if you want to kind of look at that and some parallels with that particular matter as well. I want to throw in a couple other little points here. Federalism. And this is a question that I see people on Facebook and social media kind of asking or touching on or being confused by. As attorneys, of course, y'all should remember the constitutional concept of federalism and that activities or oversight areas are left to the states if not specifically handled by the federal government. Again, way oversimplifying that, but you understand the concept. There are a lot of good articles out there relating to state versus federal roles and authority in the crisis. At a basic level, most of them are really saying the authority at the local level is very good because our local health officers, our local emergency management professionals, they know what the local facts and information are, and they can make good decisions. Pardon me. For a great resource as to what resources the federal agencies and entities are offering, I offer up the www.usa.gov/coronavirus. It has a list of agencies and what they can or can't do and what's available out there information-wise. Here's just a last thought I wanted to throw out there to you. This is a bonus, K.S.A 48-959. In 2008, I was actually doing some representation of our county with the legislature in a small committee, legislative committee, and I had to wait to present my information on part of these provisions with the health officer at that time. And what I got to listen to was an argument and presentation and hearing on how they were trying to deal with firearms in the Greensburg tornado situation. And the point was, a lot of these houses had been damaged. There were firearms that were kind of out or in an area that other folks could get to them. And the point was whether government officials should be able to pick them up and hold them and then give them back, and how that would all work. Anyway, just thought this is kind of an interesting provisions out there for those that I have concerns about gun rights, one way or the other. Again, don't care where you politically fall on it. It's just an interesting provision that ended up being actually adopted after it went through that committee and got voted on in 2008. It's interesting to me just because as I was looking through these statutes, this one popped up, and this is literally what came out of that meeting that I was in at that time. Needless to say, you'll note that no one can take other folks' guns, and that you can get them back if you want to get them back if they're taken. And this walks through all that. Just thought it was kind of an interesting statute that's out there that you may not know is out there in Kansas. One last piece I'm going to give you before we'll move on to do two different things here in just a second is next Wednesday at the same time, I'm going to offer an hour of ethics entitled Ethical Issues for Lawyers Related to Risk. It includes an activity of playing a few rounds of roulette. I use that to present you some issues on how different people deal with risk, and as attorneys, how we relate risk and explain risk to our clients. If you want to use your lunch hour next Wednesday, I encourage you to consider signing up for that. We are going to try to keep offering lunch hour CLE throughout April. I know a lot of you out there are worried about getting your annual CLE hours, and many of you are working from home and have time over the lunch hour. So we're going to try and keep doing that. The sign-up page may or may not be live at this time, but the CLE itself informationally is at washburnlaw.edu/risk issues. And that's our CLE page out there as well. Again, not necessarily trying to advertise, but let you know, we're going to try and change things up and get CLE hours out there for you in the month of April, as many of you are at home and have time to try and do those hours. All right, all of that said, I will email all of you guys a copy of the PowerPoint after the program today. I wanted to make sure I had the absolute final version rather than trying to send it to you ahead of time. So sometime this afternoon when I get a chance, we'll send it all out to you so you can take a look at it. The question, understanding some counties are including in their emergency orders, they'll quarantine visitors from other counties, i.e. those with higher infection rates. Does that fit under the scheme? I believe so. Those health officers in their expert medical opinions are saying someone that has higher exposure is coming in. It's arguably a reasonable medical opinion, and they have that authority the quarantine folks, depending on what risk they think they may have. These are going to be interestingly up for debate after the fact, but I think for right now, there's going to be given some deference to reasonable actions in those regards. Again, the problem here right now is there's not been a lot of testing in Kansas. There's not a lot of data in Kansas. And as those test results come back and more of that ramps up, you're going to have better statistical information for everybody to make decisions, health officers, just doctors and the general public, and the courts, honestly, if we see some appeals of these matters. The definition of group of individuals, including all persons within a county, most of these provisions, if you go look at the cases that are out there, are very broadly construed. So I don't know that would be incorrect. I'm going to leave the abortion clinic question alone, trying to stay apolitical today. But there are a couple answers there from other folks. Again, with all the presentation I'm doing today, I'm not trying to take any kind of political position, and certainly not on behalf of Washburn. We just kind of want the information to be out there so you kind of know where it is and you can kind of think about it a little bit. CLE credit. To be very clear, if everyone will listen just for a moment, we will confirm all of your attendance. There's 172 of you right now. And I'll tell you how we're going to do that here in just a second. We will put together a spreadsheet, which is how we do online CLE presentations, and we will submit that to the CLE Commission staff, and they will give you your credit on your electronic file. You will not receive an affidavit for this. That's not how online CLE works. But we will go through that process, and you should look for it on your online transcript. Now, two things to understand. Donna, my secretary, administrative assistant, is working from home. She has 172 of you to try and track on the spreadsheet to confirm your attendance. It will take a few days to do that. We will get it done as quickly as we can, and we will get it in as quickly as we can. The CLE Commission is working from home. It will take them some time to go through that and enter it in their records. So have some patience with us. We'll do everything in our power to make sure it goes as quickly as we can possibly make it go. Okay. All right, all that said, what I need all of you to do now to comply your online attendance is in your chat box, type your full name and your Kansas bar number. If you do not have a Kansas bar number or you are not seeking Kansas CLE credit, do not respond. Perfect. All of this gets kept as a chat record to confirm you're on and you're responding to me at a random time. We had a question that was asked in regards to whether the governor's order and the local health officer's orders interact. Does the governor supersede? Arguably, the governor supersedes, but it supersedes more so because it's more restrictive. Honestly, the county health officer could then come back and issue a more restrictive order within the county that they have authority over. Does that make sense? It's an odd way to look at it, but that's what you're seeing now is more of a cooperative net order over the whole state, so it's consistent through counties. What we had for about 2 days, 2 or 3 days actually, if you noticed it, was this hodgepodge of counties in Kansas that were putting orders out that were different periods of time and were different language, different exceptions, and there was no rhythm to how they were done. Okay, I think we've gotten most everybody out there. Again, if you have not done so, type in your name and your bar number. Do understand as well that the KDHE has authority now too. Okay, we're at about 12:40. We have about 10 more minutes. I'm going to go ahead and play the interview that I had with our Shawnee County Emergency Management Director, Dusty Nichols. Again, it's about 35 minutes long. Watch at least 10 minutes of it, and then you are free to go on about your day. Those of you that are interested are certainly welcome to watch the whole thing, and I will not drop it until we're done with it running all the way through. Okay, my name is Shawn Leisinger. I'm the Associate Dean for Centers and External Programs at Washburn University School of Law. As part of us reaching out to our students, we're trying to put more information out about basically how the academic's been handled, the processes, the law behind the processes, the realities of how things are being dealt with from a legal perspective for both our students and those in the community in general. So today I'm talking with Dusty Nichols, who is our director of the Shawnee County Emergency Management Program, basically. And Dusty and I are just going to have a little bit of a conversation here about maybe a step deeper into how emergency management operates and the authority that operates under. Dusty, can you tell me a little bit about kind of your history and what brings you to being an emergency manager at Shawnee County?
Sure. I wasn't prepared for that question, so we're going to talk plainly here. So I started my career in 1987 when I enlisted in the Air Force. I was a cop for the first 13 years, security forces. On August 11th of 2001, I moved into what they call disaster preparedness in the Air Force, which was actually emergency management. I went in August 11th under that job, and 30 days later, the world completely changed. So after September 11th, the Air Force actually started re-gearing towards more of a civilian emergency management of those counterparts. So I did that for the remainder of my 23 years. And then I went on to the States. Actually, I worked at the Joint Operations Center, Kansas, where I was the NCOIC. I was the guy basically doing the same thing I did here, but I did it for the military. So I worked at the state EOC, but on the military side. When I retired, I went to work for a strategic planning company and worked for the Joint Forces Headquarters, Kansas, where I was kind of doing the same thing, but more direct strategic planning. I was then recruited to come to Shawnee County as the Homeland Security Programs Manager. I ended up getting my degrees in security management, emergency management, and a criminal justice degree from the Community College of the Air Force. So I got drafted to come here. I did that for a couple of years, and then I became deputy director. And in 2015, I became the director of emergency management. So I did anti-terrorism. My specialties were anti-terrorism planning and chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and high-yield explosive expert, which is basically the guy to blame if something goes wrong.
So basically, you have a substantial and varied experience, it would appear.
I have. Yeah, let's go with that.
Okay.
I've responded to different kinds of emergencies, worked with different levels from federal to state, local, and I got to tell you, my love is at the local level.
Okay. And we've worked together on various projects over the years in different contexts. So you're really a member of the community. I mean, you come at this both from the professional perspective as well as one of our Topekans, if you will. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, went to high school, Washburn Rural. Graduated in '87, went away for a little while, the Air Force and stuff. Came back, finished my career at the 190th. I was the National Guard, active duty, active Guard and Reserve. It's an AGR, but it's basically a active duty Air Force at Forbes Field. I retired from there, and my family was raised here. My kids were raised here. My grandkids are being raised here. I love this community. I've been here most of my life, and don't plan on leaving. I like my job. Actually, I love my job. The team I work with is unbelievably good. And then I'm rooted pretty deep with Topeka Civic Theater and some other organizations that are here. I don't see myself going anywhere else.
Well, and kudos to you and your team for the responses you've had thus far and will continue to have. It's impressive that you're keeping folks informed. Basically the daily information briefings that are out there. It lets folks know what's going on. It seems like to me, a lot of the problems we see are folks that aren't relying on kind of that good information and first sources for information. I saw this morning a reference to a new site you're trying to put together to develop with rumors or deal with rumors. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I'll kind of go a step back to the early
Sure.
makings of this and where it came to, if that'll work. we dealt with Ebola a few years back, and we knew coming out of that we did an after action. In emergency management, anytime we do any action, we do an after action, and then we try to do improvement plans, learn from what we screwed up, and then we adjust our plans to go forward. So we learned a lot from the Ebola response, and a lot of that came from silos and misinformation. So we kind of knew what to expect if anything else pandemic-wise popped up. So I saw this come up on the news, and the next day I called our health director, our health department director, Linda Oakes, and I said, we might look at putting together an ICS structure. Just to kind of give you background on that, ICS is the Incident Command System, and it came out of 9/11 as one of the best practices. And what it does, it takes the National Response Plan, and it developed a plan called the National Incident Management System. Not a plan, but a guideline, National Incident Management System. And in that system, there's a section called ICS. ICS is a command structure that is basically an organizational structure to manage large-scale incidents or multi-agency, multi-jurisdictional incidents. So if we have hurricanes or fires or anything large across the nation, we're all trained the same. So it's a plug and play. So I can send somebody from here to New York, which we've done. Actually, Kansas has sent them to hurricanes and New York and just different places, flooding. And they are a plug and play. They're position descriptions, so you get specific training on those, and then when you show up, everybody knows how to do this. It's a nationwide system, and Kansas adopted it in 2005. Shawnee County adopted, all the Kansas counties adopted it in 2005. So it's our guiding principle. This is how we respond to any emergency within our nation. Okay. So after we did that, we've been training that. We are instructors statewide for that course, Incident Command course, and I'm also an instructor for the Public Information Officer course, which is key to your question coming up. I'll go lead into that. So I talked to Linda and said, we're going to have to put together a structure. She agreed, and we just started outlining and what we need to do at that point, because we didn't have a case here, but we'll just keep an eye on it and let this kind of thing go in the background. Anytime we have any kind of incident or accident or event, we have two problems. We have two actual emergencies going on at the same time, whatever that emergency is, and a crisis information emergency. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be a fire. There's misinformation with wildfires of who's on scene. If it's burnt somebody's house, there's always misinformation.
A lot of the issues with the internet now, and people assuming or trying to fill in facts and not knowing what's actually going on.
A good example of that is the Guard martial law, and I addressed this down on the TV the other night. That the process that we use when we adopted NIMS and ICS, there's also the Stafford Act, and there's a very specific way that the Kansas response plan is built and our local emergency operation plan is built, and it all supports that same flow of information. Any disaster is owned locally. So regardless of what happens, take Greensburg, for example. Had that tornado went through there, the first responders from that local area were the first ones to respond. It got massive. We had federal, we had state, federal, sometimes contractors coming in. I mean, just everybody showed up to that, and then they left. And who's left holding the bag? The locals. So the incident commanders come from the local area. They know the local area. They know all the people who respond there. So they need to be in charge of their own area. So that's where the misnomer and some of this misinformation comes from, is that people think when FEMA's called and goes into an area, they're coming in to take it over. That is not true. The local government, the local responders have incident command over that area. They come in and they provide resources, funding, and sometimes technique and subject matter experts, but they don't provide operations. They don't come in and take it over. Operations is held by the locals. That's no different than what we did with this pandemic. When Linda Oakes and I chatted, Linda Oakes, it's a health department function. It's not a fire. It's not a law enforcement. This is a specific subject matter expertise belongs to the health department. She's the incident commander. The operations part of this is education, because when we have a case, it's public education, preparedness on PPE and all those kinds of things, and public education. I think I already said that. Public information.
Yeah, PPE being personal protective equipment.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm an
Throwing
acronym
lots of
guy.
that.
But yeah, so personal protective equipment and those things we start looking at it. As we progressed and we saw it getting bigger and bigger, we started bringing a little bit more things into our mix, because then we started tracking funds that could be associated with this. We went out and we had a lot of leftover personal protective equipment from the Ebola. So we went out and checked the lot numbers and had to go back and see if those companies and see if the lot numbers were still valid, or if they extended the life. And so in order for me to request resources from the local level, and this is part of the Stafford Act and Kansas Response Plan, in order for me to request any resources, we have to exhaust all local resources. So that means buying it on the market. And nowadays it means going to Amazon and any place else online. If they're out, then I can have that requesting organization make the request for what they need with a suitable substitute, because sometimes they're very specific. And then we shoot that up to sometimes the region, and then if they don't have it for mutual aid, then we send it up to the state. And then if they don't have it, they do state-to-state mutual aid, which is called an EMAC, Emergency Management Assistant Compact. And if that can't get it from there, then the Strategic National Stockpile gets involved. And Strategic National Stockpile are basically manufacturers, and they store goods and services that might be needed in a major disaster, like PPE or shots or inoculations. And then we have to set up points of distribution locally. So it's all tied together. All this stuff is pre-done. So we're not doing a knee-jerk reaction. This is all processes that have been in place since 2005.
So it's structure, it's communication, it's the parties, it's the players. Everybody knows
exactly
where they can go.
And then on the command structure, there's two levels to the incident command structure. There's the incident commander themselves, or a unified command, depending on what kind of incident. We use it every day on the street. If there's a car accident with an injury, you're going to have the law enforcement and the medical show up, and then they do a unified command. And we always base everything on three principles: life safety, incident stabilization, and property conservation. If we ever get to a point in any incident where we wonder what our priority is, we review those things that are happening. Is it a life safety issue? If it is, it's at the top of our list. That's how we do business. So when we're looking at this particular thing, the incident commander will pull that team together, and it's the incident commander themselves, the liaison officer, which is somebody here who, if it's like a school, so they'll have a liaison between the incident command and the schools, for example. For this one, it's the liaison between us and maybe KDM or KDHE, Kansas Department of Emergency Management, Kansas Department of Health and Environment. So that liaison, or maybe even a local business, because we're dealing with healthcare and all kinds of industries, hospitals, that kind of thing. Then there's the safety officer that's up at that level, and they're keeping an eye on all the safety part of it, so nobody misses out. They get that information, they share it among the team. And then there's the public information officer. That's the other class that I teach, and that's what we've done with this rumor control. This is a long way to get to the answer about the.
Well, it gives a lot of the structure behind of how this is actually, how all these pieces play together.
Sure.
And I think that's something people aren't seeing in the public right now, because honestly, you don't have that much time in a news conference to kind of walk through why and how.
No. I mean, we've shared our structure. At some point, we might put it up just so people understand how the flow of information, flow of resources work, because eventually people are going to get frustrated and say, where's the holdup? And then it's easier to explain with that chart. But right now, we're just plugging away. But on the public information officer part, there's a section, or not a section, it's a kind of an offshoot from the public information officer, and it's called the Joint Information System, or the Joint Information Center. The difference between the two, the Joint Information Center is an actual location. It's a physical location that people go to, and the people being public information officers, marketing people, spokespeople from an organization. So in our Joint Information Center, actually I'll explain system. The system is just how we're doing. Is it digital? Is it teleconference? It's whatever, radio, phone, whatever it is. So the system can work inside the center. Sometimes you don't need a center, you can do a system. In this particular case, we have both going. The Joint Information Center is actually co-located in our EOC, Emergency Operations Center, in the sub-basement of the courthouse. It's restricted access, and we bring in the PIOs, the public information officers from law enforcement.
It's the basement below the basement, I think, for those that are
right in the sub-basement.
understanding what it is.
I'll put a plug in for this. It's the only blast shelter in the state of Kansas. We give tours of it because it's almost a museum. We have everything's on springs. It was built to withstand a nuclear blast to the capital city. We have escape hatches. It's cool. I'll just say that. I love working here.
But I had the ability to be there once or twice, so
yeah. We remodeled. You can come back and check it out. So, but anyway, we do give tours if anybody's interested. Give me a holler on that one. But not right now. Not right now. So anyway, we have it in one of our rooms here, and we bring those PIOs from police, city, sheriff's office, fire department, of course, health, us. We have a couple other people there, and our mayor, Michelle De La Isa, is actually part of that group too, because she's an immediate connection to local businesses and some of the critical infrastructure that can't necessarily provide a PIO to us. Interesting part about critical infrastructure, there's 16 sections of it, and it's water, power, transportation, food and agriculture. I mean, there's energy. I mean, there's all different sections. There's 16 sections that are defined by Department of Homeland Security. 80% of critical infrastructure is owned by the private industry. So, so we can't really demand, we just request. We do have our hospitals in there too, and they are private industry. So we do have their PIOs that show up and help us out. And we look at the news, we look at everything that's going on, and we try to create the same messaging, because I don't want to put out a shelter in place order and then the police are saying evacuate. That loses complete public trust in the government, local government. And we are very focused on these plans for continuity of operations and continuity of government. So we can't lose the faith of the public because of some stupid message that was misconstrued, or between the two couldn't get it figured out. So we bring all our PIOs together, especially in an event like this, and we share information, especially now with social media. Anybody puts something out, we can grab it, share it with all our official pages and so forth. So in here, like this morning's a perfect example. We had, we're trying to get businesses to identify themselves as critical infrastructure. Yes, we know what most of them are. However, we don't know their essential functions or essential services provided to that. So just a brief explanation on that. If the water plant is a good example. A water plant they're very critical, and they have the critical functions, and they have to have the key personnel, and in any case that might happen, they have to have those people show up to work. Because if we lose water does everything: heating, cooling, cleaning. I mean, you name it. If we lose water, it's a big deal.
Well, it's the folks who know how to run the plant and deal with emergency changes in the plant and what the backups are, all the system of how it actually works, as opposed to.
Exactly. We have to make sure it's up and running no matter what happens. That's a key thing for us. But the essential service to them might be the railroad or a trucking company that delivers a chlorine tank. They need chlorine to do that. So we want them to reach out to those companies and say, have you done a continuity of operations? Because if you get sick and you can't deliver this, we can't do this critical function. So all these plans are layered, and I mean, the fingers that go out, and it's impossible for one agency to track all that as day to day. Because I mean, let's face it, I'm just going to be blunt here. I'll just say 2 weeks ago, would you imagine us being here?
No, of
we're
course.
So complacent and comfortable in the way we do business. We are constantly, my team is constantly going out. Please prepare, have your 72-hour kits, prepare your communications plan. A couple of weeks ago was the severe weather awareness. We were constantly talking about people be aware and all that. We do it so much that it's just turns into static to most people. And they're like, we live in Kansas. Well, we're in Kansas. Look what's happening. So now the attention comes up, and we're having to deal with the rumors, all this stuff. And a good example was the martial law rumor. People they'll hear a rumor, spread it because of fear or lack of information, and then they try to look for things to justify that rumor. Perfect example is the martial law. The guards coming in, and they're going to walk the streets with the guns. I mean, it's just going to be horrible. And then they get pictures of the railroad carrying these military vehicles back and forth and say, this is what's coming. And they don't realize that happens every single day. We have Fort Riley. Those shipments happen every single day. People live in Noto to see the railroad goes back and forth every day with military vehicles on it.
It's very routine.
It's a normal phase of transportation for them to ship things back and forth. It's less manpower to drive vehicles. You get the idea.
Exactly.
But people will see that, and then all of a sudden they're working that back into their justification of this rumor, and then it gets on. And that's why we developed the Rumor Control Task Force, or Rumor Task Force. What we're doing with that, I reached out to, because we don't have staff. I mean, this is our normal. We're bringing people on as we can, and these are people who are who run similar to the PIOs. They run social media for their companies or their agencies. So, especially in Topeka. So the people I went out and grabbed are the people that I personally know, that I can trust, because these are volunteers. And the big thing I told them today when we got this group together. And by the way, that site went live about an hour ago.
Great.
It's on Facebook.
What's the site?
It is SNCO Rumor Task Force.
Great, thank you.
See if I can show you here in a second. But as we are going through all of this, the one thing we have to be above all is right. So if we're going to capture a rumor, dispel it or confirm it, we just got to be right. And that's the big thing. So when I reached out to these people, again, they're people who I trust. They're people that I know will do the right job. They're passionate about it. I actually have out of work, I shouldn't say out of work, they are laid off librarians who are outstanding at research.
Yes.
So they're the ones that I'm grabbing to do research, and then we get people back together, and we find a rumor, we bring them together, and we take care of it. I don't know if you can see it, but that's there you go.
Oh,
so
perfect.
Went up. So if you want to go check it out, it's up and running. I'm not sure if there's any content because it's just been right before I walked in here. It went live. So at any rate, so we see a rumor like that, we grab it, we either confirm it, dispel, then we'll put it back out. And when we do that, then we'll share it back on the Shawnee County COVID-19 update page. That page is just information. So it's validated. It's not raw data. So the raw data coming into the rumor page is grabbing the rumor, either finding out if it's true or not. If we can validate it, we turn that raw data into intelligence. Intelligence goes back on the COVID page, COVID update page, saying this is factual, here it is, this is what's happening. So
folks have a source they can actually trust in that regard.
Hopefully. I mean, it's like a local Snopes. I mean, that's what we're kind of
fair enough. I mean, that's I think part of what people are looking for is, where can I trust information? Where can I pull information that answers my question conclusively, as opposed to just really turning over that rumor mill throughout the community. Well, let me touch on a few other questions if I can with you, Dusty. Part of what's been happening is an amazing amount of work behind the scenes to pull together this information on a daily basis and provide it to the community. I don't think the public kind of understands how much time goes into making the decisions of what the next step is. Can you talk just a little bit about kind of the players and the parties and the pieces that come together to try and make the best decision on a given day? And I use this example in another presentation I did. You're flying blind. You don't have test results. You don't have data that gives you, here's our exact numbers, here's why we're doing X. You have to use the best possible information. So can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, there's two analogies I think that are perfect for this. We are building the plane as we're flying it. That's one.
Fair enough.
The other one is Dr. Pizzino put really well, because of the test kits and because of what's going on around us, we're not stupid. I mean, we're not so arrogant to assume we are so good at what we're doing that we don't have a case here. We believe we have a case here. We just can't confirm it. And the difference between what we're doing, and this is the part that's lost on a lot of people, this goes into the analysis part. I'll see if I can explain this the easiest way, because the layers are so complicated in this one that sometimes I have to literally draw a graph because it's hard for my brain, and
Well,
I'm really good at multitasking.
I've tried to explain, excuse me, very simply. All of this is intertwined. The agencies, the state, the health officer, the federal.
It's very much like our joint information system, where we pull people from all around with subject matter expertise. But even just taking one element of this entire thing, the virus itself, trying to explain to people that it's not a contact hazard, it's not necessarily airborne, but it is particle. So, and I'm saying that wrong, but see, even I'm trying to explain that, it's complicated. But Dr. Pizzino does very well in doing that. So when we're looking around the county and we don't have a positive, but we know we do, we're shining a flashlight in a dark room, a little pin light in a dark room. And if we don't take steps before it's too late, we don't call the exterminator because we don't think we have anything in our room, and then we flip the lights on and it's full of rats. It's too late to call the exterminator. So we're taking steps to prevent things that we know are there. That's the other part. The sensitive part of doing these things is we have all of our public safety partners, our elected officials at all levels. We have business partnerships that if we act too soon, we could collapse an economy, and then we collapse the city. And then if we look back and say, well, you never had a case here. So, I mean, all these things are a real balance. So we're looking at, if we do find a case, I'm going to say when we do find a case, is it because somebody's traveled, or is it communicable? If it's communicable, then we have to assume a whole bunch of people have it. But if it's just somebody who's traveled, then that analysis goes into a different pile. So then we have two directions we got to look at this. When we were looking at, when we did the declaration, this is a good example. I think this might help better. When we were looking at when some of the surrounding counties closed bars and restaurants the other day, last Friday, I don't even know what day it is. I think it was Friday. When they closed the bars and restaurants in Douglas County and Gary County, we had to look at that and say, okay, we don't have a case in Shawnee County, but if these other counties next to us think that they're people and they have cases but they can't identify, that they've shut down bars and restaurants, where are those people going to go to bars and restaurants? Shawnee County and Topeka. So we had to follow suit to stop that from happening, to keep that as well out of it. So that's one of the few times we had to follow suit. But when I put that order in, there's two things, when he put that order in for closing bars and restaurants, I was going to hold our county declaration until we had a first case. Mm-hmm. What happened with that is when we called the police chief, because when you start closing bars and restaurants, the after effect, the domino effect of that is potential, they have to enforce it because it's enforceable. It's Class C misdemeanor, so they can do that. So we have to let law enforcement know. So before that order went out, I'm calling the sheriff and PD chief and saying, hey, this is coming. Can we do anything to help you? Do you have enough resources? Do you need mutual aid? Do we need an EMAC that I talked about earlier? And their reply is, well, we have plans for that, but in order to enact that because of city ordinance, I have to have a declaration, either a city or county. And the county, when we declared, then the city, they're covered under us. So I said, I tell you what, we're going to issue, that's when I changed and said, okay, I'm going to go ahead and issue the declaration along with this order. That means now that they have the power and authority to do what they need to do according to ordinance and all that. So that's how some of this stuff was layered. That was an easy example, actually. Yeah. So when that order went out, the declaration went out. So now they can open up their plans, and they do shift work, and it covers the unions. I mean, all that stuff is built out of something as simple as that.
Well, people don't understand those multiple pieces that are at play.
Yeah,
even a basic decision to be made like that.
Yeah, I mean it's it's a double-sided 360 puzzle that
continually changing.
Yeah. I mean it's yeah, it's interesting. And
let me wrap up with
difficult to navigate sometimes.
Yeah. Let me wrap up with a couple of questions, because I know you have multiple other things you can be doing right now, and we want to get this out to our folks. What?
Just tell them I'm not coming. keep that meeting out there. Are you okay?
Couple last little questions, couple simple questions to reach out, especially to our students and our faculty at Washburn Law. What can they do to best be informed and understanding given the situation? Broad question there.
Yeah, there's different. Of course, the way my brain's working right now, there's different levels to this answer. So, the easiest one, as far as a resident of Shawnee County, pay attention to local. We have the local intel, we have the local ground truth, we have the local analysis, we have the local decisions. Home rule state, we govern our county. The trick is for us is we have KDM, KDHE, the governor's office, the Capitol building, they're all in our county. So we make decisions at the county level that directly affect them. So we have that piece that's kind of tricky for us. I mean, we're still going to do what we're going to do, but can be politically wave making. We'll just say that. So, if anybody,
you tend to be the leaders in making those decisions across the state. There's something of a leadership role.
Yes.
De facto, basically.
Yeah, but and again, we've talked about this numerous times in our meetings, our EOC meetings, and in our group meetings and command meetings. None of it's static. That's the after. We're just going to do our jobs, and everybody in this, we're passionate about it. We take in that local intel and make the decisions based on local things. So if you're in Shawnee County, stay local. Watch local news. Watch the health department's website and Facebook sites, the COVID-19 updates page, the rumor control task force. If it's local, you're going to get it from us. And it's just like the game of telephone. As soon as the further out it gets, the more screwed up the information gets. So if you're here, watch us. So that's the immediate thing about COVID.
Okay.
I know that some people probably that are going to watch this have a desire to be an elected official at some point, whether they're taking political science degrees or law degrees or whatever. There's a lot of stuff that goes into local government that people never see because this doesn't happen too often in emergency management.
Sure.
I would say there's so many free courses. I would say if you want a good understanding of what and how this works, and it's not to the detail that you're going to get when you're doing it, obviously, or getting involved, but online at the Emergency Management Institute, and it's back at, we call it MI, back in Virginia, they have independent study courses. There's one in there called 402. That is like an overview. There's ICS or IS, independent study, 700, 800, and they're just a level of courses, or the descriptor, how they classify the course. It's the overview of the National Response Framework. It's the National Response, the National Incident Management System, the Incident Command System. If you're going to go into local politics at any point in time and you want to be really good and support your local emergency managers in a situation like this, which of course, that'll never happen here, be ready for that. Because that's going to give you the background on how not just the system works, but your role in the system. Again, all disasters are owned locally. So if you're going to be a politician in the near future, or a judge, or any kind of elected official, it will happen there. It will happen to you. It will happen to your community. Just have the background and be ready for it. And our leadership is, my 3 commissioners that I deal with, they listen to me. We got them spun up. They understand. When I go up and I start dropping acronyms, well, not all of them, but they understand most of what I'm talking about. Our mayor, unbelievable. She's a natural emergency manager just without the training. So trying to keep she's a bulldog. So we got to say, don't do that yet. We got to do these things first before you go do that. She's outstanding, and she's here every single day. Commissioner Rippon's down here every single day. They're engaged. I worked a lot of disasters, all different sizes. This has run as good as it possibly can, and I feel really fortunate that I have I am part of a team that is the right people at the right time and the right place to deal with this thing. I've not personally, I've been on a lot of really good response teams, a lot of good teams in general. This is probably the best team I've ever been a part of. And I'm lucky that they consider me a leader in it. I'm flattered, and I'm not going to take that for granted. And that's part of the passion that I like this job. So.
Okay. Well, Dusty, thank you for taking some time to spend with us today. I think this is going to be very helpful for our law students and faculty, especially, to understand everything that's going into making those decisions. And I, for one, and having worked with you before and worked in government before, understand that there's an eye on the future here too. It's how do we come out the other side, and how do businesses react and all of that. So all of that's being kind of part and parcel of a lot of tough decisions that all of you are making. Kudos to you, kudos to your staff,
Thank you.
and kudos to all the elected officials you're working with. So thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thank you, and good luck, everybody.
Thank you.